All right, welcome back, everybody. It's been well, it feels like it's been a while, but I have been filming and researching for two other videos. Unfortunately, one of them had audio issues, and the other one was well, um, yeah, the research is man, it's hard to remember everything. So I've done all the research. It's just probably needs a script of some sort, which I'm not very good at. So anyway, welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about the well, firstly, I wanted to say good job to the Artemis 2 crew and all of the team at NASA who were involved in their expedition. Wonderful stuff. I was very excited to be able to catch the whole re-entry sequence from their return journey back, and it was yeah, what a sight, amazing. So yeah, I think today I really wanted to talk about why this has all come about again, because I remember when I was growing up, there was a lot of talk about, you know, space being the new frontier, and we saw a lot of the old footage from when the Soviet US space race was going on, um, and everyone kind of assumed that that was that the once America had landed on the moon, that was the first step in a beginning of space exploration, I guess, or moon base establishment, etc. So forth. And then we had decades of nothing, radio silence. NASA was still doing projects, but a lot of them got cancelled. There was a lot of budget cuts, and I think a lot of the community that first enjoyed this space race, and this, you know, because I think for the average viewer, it was more, it was less about the geopolitics of it, and it was more about pushing that new frontier and becoming a great space age civilization eventually. Obviously these would be the first steps to that. So I think that there was definitely a level of disappointment among the general public who were invested in this, um, at the fact that, well, once the Soviet collapse happened, um, it was sort of game over for the space race, and the drive that um, great powers had to secure space as the new frontier died down, um, which got me thinking. Given the new Artemis missions and how there seems to be um, a renewed project in space from the US, it made me wonder: is is there a new space race? Is this the beginning of, can we say hello and welcome back to the US Soviet space race? Um, and I think we probably can. I mean, obviously it's not the Soviets, but it's still a communist influence, which is China. Um, I mean, the European Space Agency has been around for a long time as well, but the US has never felt the need to compete with them, partially because we're allies and partially because NASA was always leading the forefront on that. Don't get me wrong, the European Space Agency do some great work, but um, that there's not this great big budget, in Europe for space exploration, right? Um, I mean, I don't even think I've seen or heard of a rocket launch from the ESA. Um, I mean, that's something I'm going to look into because I'm curious to see if they've ever done such a project. But yeah, so it got me thinking: is is space only valuable to governments in terms of defense, right? Because we see a big push from, let's say, the US, right? We see a big push back in the Soviet era for uh, this idea of establishing sort of unrivaled hegemony by proving, you know, the ability to go to space, for example. Or is it, is it all defense centric? Is it all political? Yes, I mean, 100%. I would say it is, but to what extent, right? I mean, this is the question, um, and yeah, I find it very interesting that we saw, a decline, a complete drop off in this sector, and when we look into it, well, when I was looking into why, the different sources into what's happening uh, in space, there does seem to be this idea of, defense in space is going to be a necessary concept, right? Um, which I mean, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you didn't really have, did you? I mean, there wasn't any major push for this. I mean, there was still activity, right? I mean, Russia was putting satellites up that were interfering with US and EU um, telecommunications, for example. There was a few instances of like anti-satellite missiles being developed and used and tested. So it's always been there, right? But now we've seen this sudden surge in space age projects again, and a revitalized funding. And I mean, I remember when Trump announced his the space force, or whatever that was, the National Space Force or something, the armed space initiative. I don't know. I didn't really understand what he was talking about at the time, um, because it kind of sounded like he wanted to just start up Space Marines, but I mean, which we don't really have the technology for, and there's I mean, there's no wars currently being fought in space with boots and soldiers. I mean, that could change at some point, but currently it's not, you know contested in that type of way, which again got me wondering, and it got me thinking, well, it must be contested covertly or to some degree in this method that we see, um, with all centered around satellites and owning lower geostationary orbits and low Earth orbits. Um, so yeah, I found this quite an interesting development personally, and it got me wondering as to the what the end game is here. Anyway, I'm going to start this up, and then we'll get further into it. Um, I don't have a huge amount to say on this, to be honest. Another wonky cut, but oh well. And today we're trying Aladino. I mean, I've already tried it. Um, yeah, I wanted something small. I mean, I was talking about this last time. It's a bit. I get a bit too distracted on these talks to although I have had trouble keeping this lit, even when I haven't been that distracted. So we'll see how this goes. So yeah, I've got my coffee, my cigar, all ready to go. Um, But yeah, so I think what first got me started on this was the I was reading a um, Telegraph article, which uh, in it they inferred that with the return of the Artemis mission, China had instituted a unlimited ceiling military exercise in just off the coast, um, to continue for it was over a month, which is typically unheard of over there. Usually, military exercises of this nature are short and sweet and to the point, and not often do they have unlimited ceiling exercises. And it got me wondering if, I would assume that China does see this as a threat. Uh, this idea that the US is pushing forward in this field, considering their um, announcement of strategy concerning space and how they want to become a major space player by I believe it was 2030. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is this. I mean, look, the satellite industry and the I mean, I guess the military satellite industrial complex, whatever you want to call it. Um, that's always been a player in this, right? This is, um, there's always been this contest in space for low Earth orbit, and of course, I mean, there's so many intelligence satellites that operate in this field, right? I mean, intelligence satellites are one of the main, well, maybe not main, but they're definitely an integral part to intelligence gathering and intelligence gathering communities. So this idea that there's this competition for low Earth orbit, and this race for who can put up the most satellites, the most advanced satellites, and on top of that, who can use these satellites for intelligence and electronic warfare. See, already we're having a bit of trouble with this one, which is very unfortunate. But yeah, so the this and I mean, recently I've been seeing a lot of things on satellite warfare and how satellites compete with each other in order to establish uh, almost a supremacy over the region that they're operating in, um, both defensive and offensive. There we go. Let's try and keep this lit. Um, and I think I think considering how so much covert action and and sort of peer competition happens over cyberspace, and how integral cyber warfare is currently to defense strategy and kill chain implementation, and whoa, that's a big mosquito. Goodbye. um and defense, there's a big sort of I guess conversation now about the next tier, right? Which is, I mean, it is space, right? This is the next frontier. In that, I mean, if we look at electronic gathering, electronic interference, avionics, all of these strategies rely on the fact that you have either I mean, either air superiority, or you have electronic warfare, UAS, AWACS. You need this established. Well, you need a strong command and control, strong communication structure, but you also do need this very effective um, electronic component, right? I mean, Thales, for example, or Thales, depending on how you pronounce it. They spend God knows how much on R&D for these sorts of projects, which all revolve around kill chain avionics, and how you can go from um, you know, uh, how you can progress along the strike package in order to effectively sort of. We saw it in Venezuela, didn't we? Like this is the Venezuelan strategy, right? US completely disrupted the whole radar and other related networks. Um, this is the I don't want to say the pinnacle of sort of this type of warfare, because I think that puts too much emphasis on its importance, when realistically shock and awe tactics, in my opinion, are not hugely. There's a time and a place for shock and awe tactics. You cannot use shock and awe tactics everywhere all the time. It's the same way with cyber warfare, right? If all of a sudden the US pivot was, we're gonna implement cyber warfare just across the board non-stop, that's going to be their main uh, you know uh, offensive strategy. It doesn't really. There's a limit to its efficacy, and there's a limit to how much you can actually um, affect, engage, and on top of that, countermeasures are always developed. That's the rule of escalation, right? If you have an advantage, countermeasures will always be developed. That's why it's a constant tit tat growth, exponential growth cycle for defense R&D, anything in this realm. There's no easy uh, you know, stopping point where you can say, right. I mean, everyone thought nukes, back when nukes were established, was the pinnacle, and that was the end um, of warfare as we know it, and yet we're still in high conflict. You know, world. We're still in a high conflict world at the moment. Um, you know, mad and mutually assured destruction is, you know, only really going to be used in an existential crisis, existential regime crisis, or an existential country crisis. Um, that doesn't preclude. I mean, you don't use nukes for a trade war. So, as it is a bastion of last resort, and hopefully that's how it will remain, the warfare will always continue to develop and evolve, and you'll always need that next development. And even if they develop nuke version 2, right? Even if they develop some sort of you know warfare equivalent of the nuke again, uh, there will be a pivot, because that competitive, it, I don't really want to say it's, I mean, I guess you could argue that it is, human nature. I would argue that. Some people would disagree, but I would argue that it is definitely human nature to want to compete in that sort of way, and it will always come to fruition, right? There will always be that sort of development. Um, Now, it would be nice to live in a utopia where that is precluded. Um, where we settle our countrywide conflicts with Olympic Games or something of the sort, but it's not a realistic expectation. Um, nor will it be anything of the near or even far future, in my opinion. But anyway, going back to what we were discussing, I think this whole um, this whole sector now is, I think, as saturated as it can be, considering that there's a peer competitor to the US on board that have currently and you know actionably stated and functioned with the idea that they're going to become a space enabled power, right? So I feel like, it's, while it's a nice surprise that the Artemis mission and NASA funding has increased and they're doing these projects, it's almost a natural return to the the well the mid the Soviet era, really, where you've got this competition. Um, now I think the difference is it wasn't really a race with the Soviets. Now, that being said, I don't think China's in the same position as the US is, um, in regards to space, but they've got a very strong ability to catch up. This has been a very, I don't want to say a very Chinese phenomenon, because other other countries, when it's not just China who has this ability, but they've in recent years been the one that demonstrates this the strongest, is that ability to catch up, to you know speed up on their outputs, on their strategy goals, to adapt, to develop. I mean, I mean, in the 1990s, China was a fraction of the economic power it is today. That sort of growth is unprecedented economically, um, and it really speaks to the Chinese ability to drive and adapt. Now, that being said, US, they have a foothold in this game. They're relearning. I mean, a NASA administrator was talking about how they're relearning the steps, and doing minor adjustments, but they're relearning this trade craft, which is good, and it means that they've still got the knowledge, and the the time to re-entry into this field is going to be so much faster and so much more um, effective than if you were maybe starting from scratch, or starting from a position where you've only really launched satellites, for example, right? um, and that's the thing, we don't see China launching lunar expeditions, because the curve there is so steep for them in comparison to the US. And I think for US, it's a good capitalization of this you know old Soviet race that they've had advancements in, and that they can sort of build off of, and dominate in this sector. That being said, I wouldn't rule out the Chinese ability to quickly and efficiently catch up, improve, and push in this sector. All they need is the right stimuli, which itself is quite easy to see. They're getting it, because they're not one to wait around for US to just win. Um, but yeah, so I think that's I mean, obviously there's more on this. China has already developed quite impressive capabilities, space wise. Um, so I don't think that's like a it's not really them starting from scratch anyway. I mean, they launch satellites, they have anti-satellite missiles, they have electronic warfare capabilities. These are all things that, okay, potentially not on par with the US maybe, but even in those gaps, they will cross that, and they will build build out. Um, I mean, interestingly enough, with when we saw some issues between India and Pakistan, and um, there was China. It was almost like a proxy look at China versus Europe, with the defense systems used. I mean, you had the Raphaels on one side, and you had Chinese crafts. I forget the name of the Chinese crafts, but it was a while back now. But you have Chinese crafts and you have Chinese missile systems connected to them. And before the start, before the outset of the conflict, there was this idea that, well, I mean, European would completely beat out the Chinese counterpart, and you know, obviously, all propaganda aside, it seemed to be that the Chinese counterpart performed very well against European counterparts of the similar quality and target spec. I mean, this is sort of the much to the surprise of Raphael and Dassault Aviation, which took a tank on their stock market. Um, uh, yeah, their stock market ticker. So this idea that, I mean, you know long range missiles capable of you know advanced avionic warfare integration alongside other avionic techniques is not something that's new, but it is something that has always been seen as a very Western advantage. And I think that gap is closing. And with the closing of that gap, new gaps need to be found. And hence, space is such a wide open frontier for that. We can see a lot of potential for not just low Earth orbit now, but high Earth orbit, lunar projects. These things are all potential springboards for defense projects that will have a huge effect on ground based operations. Um, Already, we see this with intelligence gathering from imagery satellites, and I mean, a huge amount of reports you hear from let's say Korean intelligence or US intelligence or Russian intelligence has, I mean, Russian intelligence in Iran or Korean intelligence in Ukraine, South Korean intelligence in Ukraine, or um, yeah, US intelligence again in Iran. Um, we've seen them effectively use satellite imagery and other techniques to collate data, huge amounts of data on North Korean troops in Ukraine, uh, you know, different military targets for Iran to strike in the Gulf and in other Arab countries, in terms of retaliatory attacks against U.S. positions in the Gulf, um, strikes against the the infrastructure in Iran, from the US. So these things are all important aspects of a greater picture, and the greater picture is this global. It's almost like a third person view of the globe, right? um anything that you can do from space, the same way we think of air superiority as being the top um military strategy. As long as you have air superiority, you are, you know, more or less pretty much on the winning side. Space is the next frontier to that. If you have space ability that outmatches your competitors, you can affect air superiority, ground superiority, naval superiority. You can affect every tier of that. It is the fourth dimension in a currently three-dimensional space. And having ownership of that is intensely strategic. That being said, we're a very long way from the technology that is being sold or being promised, or this whole idea of we're going to be, you know, I think, I'll be honest when I say I think Artemis's projections are a bit optimistic for their phases. Um, I'd be curious to see how they match up to their expected timeframes in these things, because there is a lot of groundwork, a lot of extra groundwork to be done, and I don't think reliance on private companies is going to bridge enough of that gap to meet the timeframes that are wanted or desired, right? Um, it's funny because these things, they happen all at once, right? I mean, no one touches space properly for years, and then all of a sudden, everyone wants to be on the moon tomorrow, and it's these there's a lot of bridges to gap in this respect. Let's restart this up. So yeah, I wanted to talk more about this satellite warfare as well, because some recent stuff I've seen on this is quite interesting. The use of sort of um, laser emitted beams and cybernetic. It's like sorry, not cybernetic, but cyber um, cyber operations where there's attempts to um, hack or disable enemy satellites on all sides. We're talking China, Russia, US. Everyone who has major satellite infrastructure are all using these tactics. Um, and it's very, I mean, I I kind of want to mention this to caveat my earlier comment about how we're not very that there's a big steep learning curve still, because I always get surprised by how far we actually are down the road to sci-fi. Well, some would argue sci-fi dystopias. I guess we have to see how it plays out. But this idea that we can utilize laser technology in space and other, you know, IR and IMF methods to um, sort of attack, disable, and trying to, one of my favorite ones is trying to hack into um, enemy satellites, is, a step in the advancement that I was not expecting so soon, which I think is maybe another factor as to why space as a defense argument is becoming a more talked about subject. I mean, CSIS have been talking about this recently, about the new push for considering space as a very necessary defensive. Oh, Sorry about that. We've got a little caterpillar who's decided to jump on the camera. I've just relocated him. Let's check this is still recording. Yeah, lovely. So we've got you know, we've got electronic warfare, and I'm obviously talking about the space version of what would be advanced avionics that we see in Venezuelan project, the other military kill chain scenarios where they use advanced disruption and EMF jamming and etc. so forth techniques to incapacitate and disable enemy communications and weapon systems. And the fact that this can be translated to space is indicative to the defensive or the progressive slide to needing operations in space that just go beyond satellite launches, anti-satellite missiles, and intelligence gathering through satellite imaging, and other methods that involve uh, using satellites. Um, I think this is a interesting thing because we can see how all of a sudden having physical presence in space would be able to enhance covert operations in relation to these objectives. Um, takes like satellite maneuverabilities, like maneuverability, for example. A lot of the time, satellites are involved in complex maneuvers in order to sort of avoid and defeat other satellite opponents who are attempting to either disable or hack into or um, you know damage their satellite abilities, right? um, and if you add a physical, almost like in-person element to this dynamic, the whole game changes. It's no longer an electronic battle of wits. It's you have physical presence there. I wonder how that would develop over time. I'm not gonna say I can see where that's going, because that would be a bit presumptuous, but it's definitely, I feel like it's definitely a push from great powers to establish a physical presence in space in order to be able to react and interact with these dynamics in a more direct way. Because I think that's the thing right now, is that it's it's all very indirect, it's all very covert. That's fine, but there will be a development eventually where this will move into a more into a more overt um, military endeavor. But I think that's mostly what I wanted to talk about. I think there's also a slight, um, not a slight, actually. It's quite a fairly big point on GPS as well. I mean, we've seen it over the recent years, especially very recently, the use of GPS spoofing, and attacks on GPS infrastructure in order to circumvent positioning information, um, get around. We see it in sort of the naval sphere a lot as well. AIS spoofing, um, and more directly GPS spoofing in order to show. I mean, there'll be ships and vessels that are showing up 100 miles inland, and they're sailing through the land, and this is clearly GPS spoofing because they're either trying to bypass sanctions, or they're on a mission, a military mission to deliver goods, or do some other covert activity, um, or they'll just disappear off of GPS entirely, um, switching their transponders off, and we can see this take a more direct approach when you know tools such as other satellites or anti-satellite missiles are used to bring down certain infrastructures in space that pertain to it's not just intelligence in terms of covert intelligence satellites, for example. These are utilized by civilians. GPS is utilized across the globe by a huge amount of civilians. um and you can severely disrupt these infrastructures in a similar way where you would see like in wartime, energy grids going down, or desalination plants going down, as we saw with what happened in Iran. um that was one of the strike targets, and this idea that you can start to militarily directly target satellite infrastructure to disrupt military and civilian operations of adversaries is going to be a big player in the future of in the future of the world, really. I mean, we see it with Starlink from Russia. I mean, Russia uses jailbroken Starlinks to try and circumvent the restrictions that have been placed on them on using such uh, you know utilities, on using such um, capabilities, really. um, and you'll see that happen a lot. I mean, the fact that the US sanctioned Russia against using Teslas, well, it's not really Teslas, it's Starlinks, but Elon's Starlink infrastructure shows how, and the fact that they've attempted to get around that, and are still using it, shows how important it is, really. This whole sphere is in the future, sort of, and I think that's another reason why these companies are a bit more invested in the idea of engaging in the space race, because it is, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a very expensive endeavor, um, and there has to be some sort of payoff. Now, I do think part of the payoff that they're looking for is higher investments from big boy investors, and I do think they're hard selling a lot of capabilities that are not going to be realistic. I mean, this whole idea of like AI data centers in space is going to be a very difficult one to pull off, especially in the near future. And I think that's more just to encourage investor uh, money to be inputted into these businesses. But on the flip side, there is definitely a case for growth and business development, and very impressive gains to be made by businesses for commercial, but not just commercial, I mean military applications. Let's be honest, a big portion of big bucks is spent by the US military, and that's going to attract companies to engage. And I think that was their whole selling point, really, to get more of these companies to start putting their own capital into the space race. The US knows it's fighting China on this, and it needs big billion-trillion-dollar company backing to engage. The thing is China can, because of the way its internal structure is developed, they're capable of just reallocating funds on a whim to be able to put into different projects that they think are important. So if they decide to space race, there'll be a huge influx in funds. Now, I think currently I mean, this is up for debate, but I think currently China's strategy is one of a bit more of patience, of um, I think they're trying to do a lot of things at once, um, and I think they're weighing up their options currently based on the global situation, and seeing what would be the best method to implement their strategies. But I think, you know, I mean, as we saw with China's trade strategy, once they decided they were becoming an economic superpower, they put all their chips in there and went for it. So I think we'll see that potentially with the space race with China. I think currently it's not really a race as we saw with the Soviet Union. I think there's definitely a lot more nuance to it than just you know East versus West, and it was who can build the bigger rocket, who can land on the moon first, you know. Um, hey, don't knock the Soviets; they got the first person to space. So, uh, you know, cosmonaut Gagarin, I think was it Gagarin? Um, yeah, I think so. I'm gonna have to double check that, but this is so don't always, the tortoise and the hare. Don't always think that the first one to make gains is going to be the last one to win. You know, um, the Soviets were very quick to tout the fact that they got the first cosmonaut to space. So let's see how this plays out. I'm not you know just having a home field advantage or a starter's advantage doesn't always mean you get the gold. But anyway, that's most of the stuff I wanted to talk about on this. There's a few other bits, but I'll probably want to make a different video about that if I do talk about that. Ended up being a bit of a long one, but anyway, thanks for listening, and keep smoking.